Georgia is emerging as one of the biggest battleground states in the country, and brand new polling shows Democrats may have to work a little harder to fortify these upcoming elections. For the first time, I have teamed up with Rasmussen Reports to bring you a poll on how Georgia voters are feeling about their candidates. And here's what we found. If the elections for Congress were held today, Rasmussen asked, would you vote for the Republican candidate or for the Democratic candidate? 49% said they would choose the Republican candidate. Just 39% said they would choose the Democrat. Now, 5% said they would choose some other candidate, so a third party, and 7% said they weren't sure. And it seems America's most popular president is only making things worse for his party. We asked voters, how would you rate the job Joe Biden has been doing as president? Only 24% say they strongly approved, 23% said they somewhat approved, while 51% said they somewhat or strongly disapproved. And here to discuss more and give us some more insight into this poll is the head pollster for Rasmussen, Mark Mitchell. First off, Mark, I want to say thank you so much for doing this for me, because I wanted to do it because we're seeing so much polling from mostly left-leaning, pollsters, and you see different pictures of things, and I wanted to have something that I knew I can trust, and I know I can trust you all. So tell me what you found with this poll.
Yeah, thanks again so much for doing it. Every one of these new states I get to see is its own fascinating little story. And I think people tend to lump what they call swing states together and give them the same narrative, but that was not the case. First off, I don't think Georgia is a swing state, spoiler alert. But, Nevada was, leans slightly blue, but it's on the border and they're hurting from the Biden administration. And all of a sudden, Republicans are up big. Pennsylvania, very politically divided, not very sure how that one's going to come out. But Georgia, it's very clear. This is a Republican state. And maybe there are times in the past where it was less Republican, but I'm looking at these numbers and the answer is not now. Peculiarly, that Biden approval is slightly up over the nation. But a 10-point lead for the Republicans on the generic ballot's huge. That's 6 points bigger than our last reading from a nationwide perspective. So, Georgians are by and large Republican. And I think looking at where those leads are, part of the big story is that the Republicans are up 20 points among independents in Georgia. And that's back, in 2018, independents gave Stacey Abrams a 10-point edge. So that's a really big swing. And the extent to which our polls in Georgia differ from other pollsters, besides the normal tricks, I'd say one of the big ones is that, we acknowledge that in Georgia, independents are a large part of the story here. They're a growing part of the Georgian electorate, and they've swung hard right over the last 2 years. That's big news.
That is, and I want to talk specifically about the Senate race with Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. There's been a lot of polls that put Warnock over Walker. I believe Trafalgar also had Herschel Walker leading. Tell me about specifically your findings.
So we didn't go into Georgia until this poll, but I've been watching some of them, and in some of the polls, Herschel Walker had a slight lead, and then he seemed to have lost it. And then some more polls have been showing up with Warnock in the lead. Maybe they're suppression polls, maybe not. I think the news here is that we've given Walker the biggest lead of anybody, and it's pretty close to 50%, right? If he gets over that edge, it's pretty big news. He hasn't gotten there yet, and Kemp has. So that's part of the thing to look at. We asked about Kemp Abrams as well, and there's very clear signals in the poll, like places where Brian Kemp has an edge that Herschel Walker does not have. And it's minor, but Walker's doing 10 points worse among Republicans, and that's something that they got to look at. Why is that? But also he's only behind 3 among independents as compared to Kemp. But looking at these numbers, it looks like Walker still has a comfortable lead, and between now and Election Day, presumably he's going to pick up a point or two of those third party or not sure voters. So looks like he's going to get there according to this.
Yeah, we will see. I just this morning I was talking to a source in Georgia who's really watching what's happening in early voting, and we did ask a question about early voting, And they feel that right now, which is typical of early voting, though, it's very strongly leaning Democrats. So they're a little bit concerned about that Senate race. This is a Republican person, a source I was talking to. But let's talk about early voting. What we asked people how they plan to vote in this year's midterms, and a pretty big amount said that they plan to vote early. That's what, over 60%, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, each state's different. One thing I'd caution you about looking at these numbers in the polls is that, like, they might plan on voting early, but when push comes to shove, are they going to put it off until election day?
Yeah.
I would have thought election day numbers would have been higher, especially in a state that leans red. But looking at other questions in the polls, I would say what kind of stood out to me is how confident Georgians seem to be in their electoral systems and elected officials. Slightly more confident than I would have expected, given some of the headlines that have come out between now and the 2020 election.
Yeah, and let's talk about that because we did want to get a gauge how Georgia voters felt about the integrity of their elections, given that there were so many cases filed in Georgia related to the 2020 election. There's been, like you said, a lot of headlines. So we asked, how confident are you that the upcoming elections in Georgia will be secure and fair? And you had, a pretty good percentage that felt confident that they would be secure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of ways to look at this. If I ask the question, how concerned are you? Or like, how confident are you? You kind of always see something like plus or minus 10 points that looks like this, right? There's a slice that it like top of mind, and other people just want to sort of like click through that question. I mean, one way that you could read that is that only 35% of the Georgian electorates have 100% confidence in the electoral system. Another way you could read that is, well, only 7% are not at all confident. And like the party splits weren't that much different. Republicans, only 30% of them are very confident, but only 49% of Democrats. And here's a big one: like independents are suspicious, right? Only 25% of them are very confident. And I think that fits with nationwide numbers we see as well. Like independents have this like aspect of not trusting either of the major political parties there. But you look at that and you say, all right, well, they're relatively confident in the electoral systems in Georgia. I guess that's good. But they also have the same signal that we've seen elsewhere when we ask how likely is it that cheating affected the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. And sure enough, a strong majority say yes. And that matches the nationwide numbers. So it's the same thing. Like people suspect, they're likely to say that fraud affects elections. But it's part of the same kind of pattern you see too. Like you ask a question like, are all cops racist? And people say yes. And then you ask, well, are your cops racist? And people say no. I think there might be a little bit of that going on.
Yeah, I agree. These were interesting. I mean, we didn't find what I thought we might find in some instances related to this. And remind me, did we ask specifically about voting machines? Because that's been such a big issue in Georgia. There is still a push to go to paper ballots.
Yeah. Where was the paper ballot question? So this one was interesting. We asked it in a pattern of questions where we gave them statements and gave them the opportunity to agree with it. And most of the agreement was in like an affirmative or positive direction, like my election is secure. But this one was, I'm not confident my vote is secure, and I support a return to voting with paper ballots. So there's still a little bit of that same kind of pattern. In this case, 48% of Georgians at least somewhat agree with that statement. So near a majority, you could say, like, want to return to paper ballots. But I think that signal might have been lent to that same pattern of people like agreeing with things. But also, looking at that question, a quarter of the Georgian electorates strongly agree you should go back to paper ballots. And 32% of Republicans strongly agree, 19% of Democrats. So there's a good like little bipartisan chunk there. And otherwise, it's pretty consistent across age, race, sex, and everything. But on the flip side, only 25% of the electorate strongly disagrees with going back to paper ballots. So that one's kind of a wash. But it's
Yeah.
stepping back and looking at it, you can't say, well, everybody just loves these new electronic voting machines.
Right. It's. I'm so glad we asked the question because it's interesting to see exactly what people think, and also you get a gauge for how much people know when you ask questions as well. And sometimes people just aren't that familiar with the subject matter. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm really glad we did this. We need to get our pulse on every state that we can.
Yeah, absolutely.